Part 1, Disappearance. June 12, 1987, Belhaven, Mississippi. The air in Belhaven was thick with humidity, the kind that settled on your skin and refused to leave. The town, surrounded by dense pine woods and winding dirt roads, was quiet that summer. Not much happened in Belhaven, and for most of its 3,200 residents, that was perfectly fine. Reverend Elijah Morrow had been the pastor at New Light Baptist Church for nearly 17 years. He was a tall, dignified man in his late 40s, known for his baritone voice and calm presence. Born and raised in the Delta, Elijah was one of the few black men in the region who had earned a theology degree from an integrated seminary up north. He'd returned home to preach, to build, and to tend to his people. On Friday, June 12, 1987, he was last seen locking the church doors after evening service. It was a modest sermon, no choir, no guests, just a short talk on endurance. A few of the elderly congregants recalled that he seemed distracted, his mind elsewhere. He left just before sunset in his maroon Buick LeSabre. He never made it home. When he didn't arrive for Saturday's men's breakfast meeting, no one panicked at first. But by Sunday morning, with the pulpit empty and the church silent, concern turned to dread. The search. The Belhaven police chief, Roy Ledbetter, was a burly white man with a cigarette always tucked behind his ear. He called in a few deputies and organized a local search, fields, backroads, even the old river path. Nothing. By Monday morning, the Mississippi State Police were involved. Helicopters circled the nearby swampland, volunteers combed the pine thickets, and divers searched the deeper parts of Millman Lake. They found his car 2 days later, 28 miles north, abandoned on a Forest Service road near High Creek Preserve. The driver's door was open. The keys were gone. His Bible was still in the back seat, but the seatbelt was unfastened, and the glove compartment had been rifled through. Inside the trunk, neatly folded, were his robes and a small suitcase with 3 changes of clothes, untouched. It was clear he had not planned to run. But what was most chilling was what wasn't there: his wallet, his keys, his cross pendant, and Elijah himself. Years of silence. The case made the Jackson newspapers and was briefly picked up by a national outlet, then faded. For a while, there were whispers. People said maybe it was the Klan, maybe drugs, maybe he'd found something he shouldn't have. His brother, Henry, who lived in Chicago, hired a private investigator. Nothing came of it. Eventually, the world moved on. Every June, New Light Baptist held a vigil. The altar stayed lit that whole month, a photo of Elijah framed beside a flickering candle. The congregation aged. The rumors faded. By 2003, the forest had grown thicker. The road where his car had been found had fallen into disuse, overgrown with vines and cracked roots. Campers and hunters still passed through, but rarely that far in. Until one night in September 2008, when something changed. September 14, 2008, High Creek Preserve. Tyler Green was 24 and restless. A third-year architecture student at Tulane, he'd come to the woods to clear his head after a messy breakup and a failed exam. He hiked deep into the woods with his sleeping bag, journal, and a flask of bourbon. His plan was to be alone. That night, just past midnight, he stumbled over something in the dark near a thicket of palmettos. His flashlight caught on what looked like fabric. Dirty, faded, and half buried under leaves. He pulled at it. The earth gave way in a damp suck. What he uncovered made him scream. He ran for 6 miles until he found cell service. September 15, 2008, Belhaven County Sheriff's Office. Tyler Green sat across from Detective Carolyn Miles, eyes wide and bloodshot from a sleepless night. He clutched a cup of vending machine coffee with trembling hands, while his left leg bounced nervously. "I didn't touch anything after I opened the cloth," Tyler said. "I swear. I thought it was a sleeping bag at first. Then I saw the Detective Miles held up her hand. Slow down. Let's walk through it again. She was in her mid-40s, calm, precise, the kind of woman who didn't rattle easy. Belhaven had seen its share of missing hikers, meth labs, and old family feuds turned bloody, but this felt different. She'd grown up in town. She remembered Elijah Morrow's disappearance like it was yesterday. Tyler swallowed. It was wrapped tight, like a bundle. Camouflage cloth, the kind hunters use. It had been there a long time. The ground under it was dry and packed. Something about it didn't feel like trash. So I looked closer. What was inside? He blinked. A wooden box. Heavy. Old. The size of a lunchbox, but thicker. It had a clasp. I didn't open it. I saw a symbol burned into the top, a cross, but not like a church cross. It looked wrong. Detective Miles leaned forward. Wrong how? It was crooked. Uneven arms. Like someone carved it by hand in the dark. The scene. Carolyn and 2 deputies drove out to the location that morning, guided by GPS coordinates Tyler had marked on his phone. It took them 45 minutes to reach the spot on foot, a gnarled pocket of forest near the old preserve line, choked with underbrush and littered with mossy stone outcrops. The bundle was there, exactly as Tyler described it. The air felt strangely still. No wind. No birdsong. Only the occasional drone of a distant cicada. Deputy Rusk stepped forward first, gloved hands lifting the tarp. Beneath it was a thick patch of disturbed soil. Something had been buried, not deep, just enough to conceal. Carolyn knelt beside it. The box, partially unearthed, was darkened with age. Its surface bore scratches and wormholes. The symbol Tyler mentioned was burned into the top. A cross, but uneven, 2 intersecting lines, both bent slightly, forming almost an X with one longer arm. Around it, faint circles, like fingerprints pressed into the wood. They photographed everything before lifting it. The box was locked with a tarnished metal clasp. No obvious keyhole, but the hinge creaked as it gave slightly under pressure. Inside, under layers of crumbling black cloth, were 3 items. A cassette tape labeled in neat block letters, July 5th, Confession Room. A silver cross pendant, snapped clean through the stem. A scrap of old paper, folded tightly and sealed with wax, the wax marked with the same odd cross symbol. Deputy Rusk muttered, "Looks like a priest's stuff." Carolyn didn't respond. She was staring at the cross. She remembered it from the vigil photos, Elijah's favorite. He wore it every Sunday. Back at the station. They sent the box to the state forensics lab in Jackson. The soil samples suggested it had been buried no more than 15 years, newer than expected. That meant someone had come back after the original disappearance, years later, to hide it. The paper was too fragile to open without risking damage. Experts were called in. The cassette, however, was intact. They didn't wait. The tape. In a dimmed room inside the sheriff's office, Detective Miles loaded the tape into an old player. The hiss of static filled the space, then a faint clatter, followed by breathing. Male voice. Southern. Tired. "This is Reverend Elijah Morrow. July 5th, Confession Room, behind the pulpit. I don't know who'll hear this, but I need to speak it aloud. I don't expect forgiveness." A long pause. "Something's wrong in Belhaven. Something old. I should have listened to Miss Odella. I laughed when she warned me, thought she was just grieving. But now I see it." Another pause. "I went out there, to High Creek, where they said the lights were. The trees don't move right there. There's a ringing in your ears, like a choir underwater." He sounded unwell, strained, feverish. "I saw the boy again. He shouldn't be alive. His eyes weren't his. A faint noise in the background, a whisper? A knock? If anyone finds this, don't open the door. No matter what you hear. And if you see the dog, for God's sake, don't follow it. Click. Tape ends. The ripple. Within days, word spread through town. People talked in hushed tones at the diner and gas station. Old rumors surfaced, ghost sightings, strange fires, people going silent after night hikes near High Creek. Someone recalled a girl who vanished in 1979, never found. Others whispered about Miss Odella, the midwife who used to live near the church, who died in a fire in '88. Carolyn pulled old case files from the archive. Half of them were missing. Others were redacted with no explanation. Someone had gone through them. Then, a week later, someone broke into the sheriff's evidence locker. Nothing was taken, except the cassette. Part 3, The Woman in the Fire and the Boy with the Hollow Eyes. September 20, 2008, Belhaven Public Records Office. Detective Carolyn Miles leaned over a warped wooden table in the dim archive room behind City Hall. Dust hung in the air like mist, and most of the drawers hadn't been touched in years. She wore gloves, not for forensics, but to avoid the mold. She was looking for Odella Marston, the woman Reverend Morrow mentioned on the tape. Odella had lived on the outskirts of town, in a crumbling clapboard house near the creek that fed into High Creek Preserve. Locals used to call her a root woman, though no one ever said it aloud while she was alive. She was a midwife and herbalist, and for many, especially black families in the segregated years, the only person they trusted with childbirth or illness. She never married. No known children. Carolyn eventually found the property record, handwritten in blue ink. Property burned down October 18, 1988. Cause, undetermined. Odella's body was never recovered. Only her spectacles were found in the ashes, folded neatly on a metal stool that didn't burn. What stood out most was the witness name scrawled at the bottom. Elijah Morrow. Flashback, October 16, 1988. A neighbor, Cora Tillman, 78 years old and nearly blind now, still remembered the night before the fire. When Carolyn visited her the next day, Cora sat in her porch swing, clutching a small rosary and a faded photograph of Odella in her 20s, proud, dark-skinned, eyes steady. That woman saw things, Cora whispered. She said there were shadows under the trees out by High Creek. Said they wore faces that didn't belong to them. One time, she told me Reverend Elijah had come to her, begging for a name. A name? Carolyn asked. Cora nodded. Said he needed to bind something. That whatever came back from the woods wasn't right. A boy from nowhere. Back at the station, Deputy Rusk brought Carolyn something from the evidence room, a yellowed, brittle missing persons report from August 12, 1971. The file had been misfiled under M4 Miscellaneous. The boy's name was Reuben Dawes, age 10. Vanished from his front yard on a summer afternoon while playing with marbles. His mother, a laundress named Sarah Dawes, claimed he followed a stray dog toward the forest. The dog had one white eye and moved wrong. Reuben was never found. Here's where it got strange. A week later, Reuben returned, or someone who looked like him. Neighbors said he was quiet, that he wouldn't eat meat or drink water unless it came from the well. He didn't speak, only stared. His mother swore it wasn't her son. She screamed it to the sheriff. But blood work matched. Fingerprints matched. 2 months later, Sarah was dead. Apparent suicide. Reuben disappeared again in 1985. 14 years later. And Reverend Elijah was the one who filed the missing persons report that second time. The note attached. This boy is not who he says he is. I believe he has no soul. The returned file. Later that evening, something eerie happened. A clerk named Denise, who was helping resort files from the old police annex, called Carolyn down to the basement. "This just appeared on my desk," she said. "It wasn't here this morning." It was a file Carolyn had been looking for, the internal investigation report on Elijah Morrow's disappearance, dated 1987. Officially, it had been marked closed, presumed voluntary absence. But inside the manila folder was a second, unfiled statement. It was dated June 11, 1987, the day before Elijah vanished. The handwriting was shaky. It was unsigned. "They are waking again. The woods are whispering. I saw Reuben last night. He hasn't aged. He asked me if I'd seen the dog. Odella was right. I should have never opened the door in the old confession room. The circle is incomplete." And finally, at the bottom. "If I disappear, find the cellar under the floorboards." The cellar. Carolyn returned to New Light Baptist Church the next morning with a crowbar and a locksmith. The building was still active, but its basement hadn't been touched in years, mostly used for storage. She went alone, not wanting to alarm the congregation. Behind the pulpit, under the false wooden riser where the old confession booth used to stand before renovations, she found what looked like an air vent, sealed with rusted screws. When she pried it open, the musty air hit her like a wave. Behind it was a drop, maybe 5 feet, leading into a stone chamber barely big enough to crouch in. A single candle stub sat on the floor. Dried wax had pulled on the stone. And carved into the wall, dozens of times in spirals, were the words, "He does not blink." In the center of the floor, scratched into the stone, was the same warped cross symbol from the box. And in the corner, wrapped in oilcloth, she found a second cassette. No label. No date. She hesitated. Then pressed play. The second tape. No introduction. Faint rustling. Then, Elijah's voice, lower this time, hoarse. "He waits by the tree line. Every night. He wears Reuben's face, but it slips when he's still. Sometimes his mouth moves and no sound comes out. That's when you have to close your eyes." A gasp. Shuffling. Odella said the woods were hungry. That something old lived beneath the roots, tied to the first blood spilled on this land. A sound, a soft tap. Repeated. Then silence. "If I go missing, don't look for me near the church. Go to where the trees bend inward. Where the air tastes like iron. Bring a silver cross. And don't follow the dog." The tape cuts off abruptly. The stranger in town. 3 days later, a man appeared at a motel outside Belhaven. Tall. Clean-shaven. Wore a dark suit despite the heat. Said he was from the State Historical Society, researching regional folklore. He asked about the fire. About Odella. About the boy Reuben. He never gave a name. But the night he checked out, the motel clerk found something on the counter. A photograph of Reverend Elijah Morrow, taken in black and white. The date on the back? June 12, 1997, exactly 10 years after his disappearance. Part 4, The Trees That Bow and the Man Without Time. September 26, 2008, High Creek Preserve, 6:17 a.m. The sun hadn't yet breached the trees when Carolyn Miles stepped beyond the tree line of High Creek Preserve, guided only by a topographic map and a pair of red-tipped flags staked by forestry workers during a recent fire risk survey. Her boots crunched across the brittle forest floor. Somewhere ahead, a place referred to in Elijah's tape as "where the trees bend inward" was marked on the map with an ambiguous symbol, not part of any legend. It was Rusk who'd noticed it first, an area where trees appeared to lean unnaturally inward, forming what looked like a half-ring from aerial imagery. No one had surveyed it up close. Until now. The circle. Carolyn reached the ring just past a dry creek bed. And sure enough, the trees bowed. Not in a gusted, natural way, but in formation, as if responding to a force at the center of the grove. Roughly 37 pine trees stood in a perfect semicircle, all leaning slightly toward the center, as if frozen mid-step. The earth was unnaturally dry. No undergrowth. No birdsong. Dead still. In the very center lay a circle of flat stones, about 5 feet wide, pale and smoothed. No moss grew on them. It looked man-made, but very old. The center was hollow, a dark, circular depression about 6 inches deep. Ash had pulled inside, undisturbed. Carolyn crouched. In the ash, partially buried, was a silver chain, blackened, but intact. Attached to it was a pendant, carved with a symbol she recognized from Elijah's cassette box and the cellar wall, the twisted cross, intersected with a circle and hook. She took photographs. Bagged it. Then paused. Near the edge of the ring, beneath the bowing pines, a faint rustle stirred the silence. Carolyn stood and scanned the trees. Hello? No answer. Then, a low whistle. A child's whistle. Coming from the direction of the dry creek bed she'd crossed. The old campground. Later that afternoon, she met with a local named Trent Holloway, 58, a volunteer ranger who had been with the Forestry Service since the 1970s. When Carolyn showed him the pendant, he froze. "I've seen that symbol," he said quietly. "When I was 19, I found it carved into a log bench near an old campground, maybe 2 miles south of High Creek's main trail. Place was abandoned. The trees were wrong there too." He agreed to take her. They hiked for half an hour into deeper woods until they reached a small clearing overrun with ivy and vines. Half a fire pit. Rotten logs. A rusted lantern hanging from a hook nailed into a tree. And there it was. Carved into a bench, the same symbol. But something else caught Carolyn's attention. A name. Under the symbol, someone had etched. Reuben. 1985. Flashback, November 1985, recovered journal page. Carolyn returned to the records building that evening and began cross-referencing anything from 1985 that might mention the name Reuben or the campsite. In an unlabeled cardboard box tucked behind old forestry files, she found a journal. It belonged to a field nurse named Janice Palmer, who had briefly volunteered at a summer rehabilitation camp for troubled teens called Camp Weller, a now-defunct program run from trailers near High Creek. Her entry from November 1, 1985, read, "There's one boy here, Reuben, who doesn't belong. He stares too long. Talks too slow. Once I saw him petting a dead bird. He didn't know I was watching. He whispered something to it in a language I don't know. The next day, the same bird was alive. I swear it. Same markings. But its eyes were all wrong. He doesn't sleep. Or if he does, he sleeps standing up. I saw him once by the trees at 3 a.m., just standing, breathing shallow, like he was waiting for something." The journal ends abruptly. No further pages. The hollow-eyed boy. Carolyn shared the journal with Rusk, who, spooked, started looking into who ran Camp Weller. Turns out, the camp was funded by a religious charity that no longer existed. The chairman? A man named Thaddeus Vale, a former deacon at New Light Baptist Church. Vale left the church the same year Elijah disappeared. He moved to a remote area near the Louisiana border and reportedly died in 2002. His cabin was burned in a fire, no known cause. Just like Odella's. A pattern was forming. Each person tied to Reuben, or to whatever Reuben was, had vanished, burned, or left behind strange remnants. It was as if the forest, or something in the forest, refused to let them leave cleanly. October 1, 2008, the cabin. The address for Vale's old property still existed in tax records. Carolyn and Rusk made the trip together, 4 hours southwest. There was almost nothing left. Just a scorched concrete foundation, a rusted bed frame, and, behind the remains of the house, a trapdoor in the ground, almost hidden by overgrowth. Rusk lifted it. Beneath was a narrow root cellar, blackened, soaked with the scent of thyme and ash. They found bones. Dozens of small bones. And a single, intact item. A Bible, bound in rough leather. But not in English. The text was old. The letters were Latin, but the words wrong, like a dialect that had been mimicked but not understood. And inside the back cover, written in pen. He wears the boy's skin, but he is not of us. He is watching the water now. Soon, the circle will close. October 2, 2008, the camper returns. Carolyn received a call that night. From the young man who had first found the box in 2008, the camper from the original police report, Jared Thomason. He'd gone silent after his initial statement. Moved away. But something brought him back. He walked into the Belhaven police station pale, shaking. "I didn't tell you everything," he said. "That day, when I found the box, I was camping with a friend. We split up. I was setting up firewood. He was walking along the edge of the creek. Said he saw a dog. He began crying. I found his backpack. But never him. And now I've seen him again." Carolyn leaned forward. "Where?" Jared's voice was barely a whisper. "In my backyard. Last night. He knocked on my window. Smiled. But his eyes, he doesn't blink." Part 5, The Sermon That Wasn't Heard. October 4, 2008, Belhaven Police Department, Evidence Room. Carolyn Miles sat alone in the dim light of the archive room, poring over the weathered Bible found beneath Thaddeus Vale's burned-down cabin. Latin roots ran through its pages, but not in any recognizable theological form. It was stitched with malformed scripture, jumbled verses, cryptic annotations in the margins, and names. Repeated names. Elijah. Vale. Reuben. One stood out, Morrow, with an O. Not Morrow like a surname, but a word capitalized in a peculiar passage. The Morrow walks. The Morrow hears no bell. The Morrow speaks, and the sky hushes. It appeared over a dozen times. This wasn't a Bible. It was a book of rituals, or mimicry of one. October 5, 2008, Church Basement Archives, Belhaven. Carolyn obtained a rare appointment to view the restricted archives of New Light Baptist Church. The congregation hadn't officially dissolved, but since the 1990s had functioned mostly in silence, no public sermons, no weddings. The building had long since fallen into disrepair. A deacon named Ernest Langley, age 74, let her in. He hadn't spoken of Elijah Morrow in over 20 years. When she asked what happened the night the priest vanished, Ernest closed the cellar door behind him and leaned on his cane. He said he saw the boy again. The one from Camp Weller. But older now. Taller. Said the boy came into the church and sat in the second pew. Only he wasn't breathing. He was swaying. Back and forth. Quiet like. Elijah went pale. Sent everyone home mid-sermon. Carolyn asked if anyone else had seen the boy. Langley shook his head slowly. Just Elijah. That was his last sermon. Night after, he walked into those woods and didn't come back. Then, almost reluctantly, Langley added. He left something behind in the pulpit. We kept it sealed. He unlocked a drawer behind the stage. Inside was a cassette tape labeled Audio, September 30, 1987, Last Confession. October 6, 2008, Private Listening Room. The tape began with static. Then breathing. A voice followed, unmistakably Elijah's, calm but strained. "This is my testimony. If this is found, I ask no forgiveness, only truth." He came to me again. The boy with the dry eyes. He knew my name. Knew my sister's name. Said them slow, like they were written behind my teeth. He called himself a steward. Said his time had been borrowed. He gave me something, a thread, black and stiff as wire. Told me to plant it where the trees lean, in the place without a shadow. But I saw what grew there. I saw my own mouth sewn shut in the soil. I heard sermons whispered backward. I felt God turn his face. Then a pause. There is a map, hidden in Vale's songbook. I left it in the baptistry, behind the loose tile. Please, if anyone finds this, don't let him walk again in flesh. He is not ours. October 6, 2008, evening, New Light Baptistry. Carolyn returned alone that evening and, behind the broken tile, found a weathered hymnal, damp and sealed in waxed paper. Inside, scribbled on the back page, was a hand-drawn map of High Creek, and a symbol marking a spot simply labeled the mouth. Near it was another word, vestry. October 7, 2008, Deep Forest, the mouth. She and Detective Rusk, under the guise of a backcountry search effort, reached the coordinates from Elijah's map. The location was remote, off-trail, marked by no signage. But something unnatural guided them. Each time they considered turning back, a low knocking sound echoed from somewhere in the trees. At last, they came upon a small cave mouth, barely 6 feet wide, choked with dead vines and insect husks. Inside was a descending tunnel, carved into limestone and slick with condensation. They descended with caution. 40 feet in, the tunnel opened into a man-made chamber, stone floor, altar-like structure in the center, and walls inscribed with markings, the same ones from the pendant, the burned Bible, and the cellar wall in Odella's home. But there was something more horrifying. On the back wall, a mural. A figure, black-robed, arms spread. No face. Instead of features, it had a hollow where the face should be. And beneath, 7 figures bowed, including one in a preacher's collar. Someone had written over the mural in faded chalk. Sicut in caelo, et in terra. The morrow is not death. The morrow is return. Buried in stone. At the base of the altar, Rusk found a hollow panel. Inside, 3 human teeth, wrapped in linen. One of them was gold-capped, matching Elijah Morrow's dental records. They had found a grave. But why only teeth? And who had placed them there? October 9, 2008, new reported sighting. The next morning, Carolyn received a report from a hiker, a woman named May Garber, who'd been walking her dog near High Creek when she saw a man in priest's clothing standing just within the trees. He didn't speak. Just watched. His collar was dirty. His shoes were wet. And his eyes were wrong. Black, like spilled ink. He smiled once, but his teeth weren't real. Archival discovery, 1831, Belhaven Ledger. Rusk began digging into pre-20th century records, tracing the name Morrow not as a surname, but as a local legend. He found something buried in the Belhaven Ledger of 1831. A newspaper column referencing the Morrow of the Hollow, a rural folktale about a preacher who vanished in the woods and came back different. It described a pattern of 7-day disappearances, followed by a returning, where the missing man would speak truths he never knew, weep tar, and begin to gather listeners, especially children. Within weeks, his followers would disappear. The article ended with the phrase, "Some sermons are not meant to be heard. Some bells toll backward." The gathering begins. As October wore on, sightings of the priest in the forest increased. Children near the outskirts of Belhaven drew pictures of a man with no face and shiny teeth. 2 hikers disappeared near the cave mouth. And in the trees near the circle where Carolyn had found the pendant, someone had tied 7 black strings, all leading toward the old campground. Each string ended in a tooth. Part 6, The Return Tape. October 12, 2008, Belhaven Regional University, Department of Folklore Studies. Professor Lydia Caro, a specialist in Appalachian oral traditions, agreed to meet with Detective Rusk and Carolyn Miles. They brought her the original Bible recovered near Vale's cabin and the copies of the Morrow references found in the 1831 ledger. She looked at them in silence for over 15 minutes, then finally spoke. "You're not looking at Christian doctrine. These aren't sermons. They're inversion hymns. Blasphemous by structure. For every mention of a divine light, there's a reference to a return through shadow." She flipped to the annotated line in the false Bible. "The Morrow walks. The Morrow hears no bell." That's not just poetic. It implies an entity who exists outside sacred time, one not summoned, but unsealed. Not born, not dead. Just, waiting for attention. She paused, hesitating. "I've only seen one other mention of something like this. A 2002 field study done in this area, unofficial. A graduate student from our department went missing after turning in a short research paper titled, The Morrow of the Hollow, Oral Anomalies in Forested Echo Chambers." She opened a locked drawer and took out a plastic cassette box. Inside, a tape labeled Field Tape, Ward, Jonas, April 2002. October 13, 2008, Listening Room, BRU. Carolyn and Rusk sat in the soundproof room as the tape began. First, the crunching of leaves underfoot. Birds. Wind. Then, a voice, male, mid-20s. "It's about 7:41 p.m., I'm about 4 miles southeast of Belhaven, tracking what locals call the mouth. They describe it as an old grove that distorts sound, something like a natural cathedral." Crackling. Breathing. Then a sudden shift in tone, the voice falters. "I think I found something. There's a wall. Or maybe a door. But it's made of bark. It looks grown, not built." He knocks gently. Then, the tape goes silent for 10 seconds. Then, a voice not his. It speaks backward. Low-pitched. Whispered. Wet. Niaga eswero met. Denetzi el sa e. The Morrow again. He has listened. Jonas speaks again, clearly afraid. "No, wait, I didn't say anything. Who is that? Who's out here with me?" Then came the sound of something moving rapidly through leaves, not footsteps, but a dragging, as if something long and heavy slid across the forest floor. "Oh God. I see, someone. I see a collar. Black. He's not walking. He's not, his feet aren't moving. He's floating. Oh God." Static. Then, suddenly, clear audio. A man's voice, calm, familiar. Elijah Morrow's voice. "Jonas. You wrote your truths. Now you must listen to mine." Screaming follows. Then static. And finally. The sermon was not for the flock. It was for the root. October 14, 2008, Missing Persons File, Jonas Ward. Carolyn pulled the police report for Jonas Ward, dated April 29, 2002. He had gone missing after telling his girlfriend he was going to the forest for one last recording. Authorities assumed he fell or got lost. His body was never recovered, but his car was found parked near High Creek, not far from where Carolyn and Rusk had found the mouth. But more disturbingly, the cassette they had just listened to had never been catalogued. Lydia Caro had said she kept it hidden because she knew something was wrong with the tape itself. Carolyn later tested it with an audio specialist. There were no magnetic anomalies. But parts of the tape had been recorded at speeds not achievable by human equipment. October 16, 2008, second camper found. A teenage hiker named Chris Lanning, age 17, vanished for 4 hours in the High Creek area. When he reappeared near dusk, barefoot and in shock, he was holding a church bulletin from 1987, its ink faded but legible. It listed Reverend Elijah Morrow as presiding. Chris couldn't speak for 2 days. When he finally recovered, he told his parents he had seen a folding man with no lips who had whispered his name and told him a seat was saved for him. October 18, 2008, old letter discovered. A new source came forward, a retired postal worker named Eugene Browder, who had once handled the mail delivery to New Light Baptist in the 1980s. He claimed that 2 weeks after Elijah disappeared, an unmarked letter arrived addressed only as "To the one who waits by the font." Inside was a single piece of paper. It read, "Not every sermon is for ears. Some are for the dirt. Dig where the last bell tolled, and you will find the vestry's mouth." Signed with the symbol, Phi, same as the one in the forest mural. Eugene hadn't known what it meant. He had kept it in a shoebox with other oddities until he saw the priest's face again in the news that month. October 20, 2008, back to Camp Weller. Carolyn, Rusk, and a small team returned to the ruins of Camp Weller, this time equipped with ground-penetrating radar. In the dirt near Cabin D, the scanner detected a rectangular anomaly, about 6 feet down. They dug carefully. At 5:17 p.m., they uncovered a coffin, old but intact. Inside was a robe, black, with a silver thread, and a bundle wrapped in wax cloth. Inside the cloth, a child's shoe, size 3. A cracked pocket Bible. And a jawbone with no teeth. On the inside of the coffin lid, carved with what looked like a rusted nail, was the phrase, "Let him rest, or walk forever." Carolyn's note to herself, October 21. I no longer know if this is a murder case. I don't know if Elijah Morrow is dead, returned, or something between. But I know this, someone or something is leading us back, one step at a time. And wherever this trail ends, it's not in the forest. It's under it.